Thank you everyone for joining. We will begin momentarily.
Good afternoon. My name is David Mahan. I'm the Associate President for Data Research and Advanced Analytics at the Council on Post-Secondary Education. Welcome to our webinar, Kentucky Engineering Sector Analysis. We have a special treat today. I'm going to introduce the President, Dr. Aaron Thompson, and he's going to give us some opening comments and some ideas that he's thinking about with the report to start our conversation. Many of you guys have known Dr. Thompson over the years and worked closely with him, and so he's certainly a Kentucky legend. For those that don't know Dr. Thompson, he is a passionate advocate for higher education. As a first-generation college student from rural Clay County, Kentucky, he experienced firsthand the transformative power of a college credential. As president of the Council on Post-Secondary Education, he works to ensure all Kentuckians have an equal opportunity to improve their lives through post-secondary education. Before taking the helm at the CPE, Thompson served as the interim president of Kentucky State University and as the executive provost and the faculty member at Eastern Kentucky University. He has extensive leadership experience within the private and the not-for-profit sectors and is a highly sought-after speaker. Thompson has authored numerous books on diversity, cultural competence, first-year experience programs, and student success. Thompson received his doctoral degree in sociology from the University of Kentucky with an emphasis on organizational leadership. Thompson has earned a master's degree in sociology from UK and a baccalaureate degree in political science from Eastern Kentucky University. So with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Thompson for some initial remarks. And Heather, if you could go to the next slide.
Thank you, Dr. Mann. Good day, everybody. It's really good to see some of you and not see some of you others. I will tell you, it's my privilege to be the president of the Council on Post-Secondary Education in Kentucky. And it's my privilege to work with professionals like David, who in fact put forth what I consider to be not only a strong data process, but a strong analytical process. And as you all know, the difference is one can tell us something, the other gives us direction on many things. So I appreciate David, your work and your team's work, and I also appreciate Emsi and all those that have worked with us to prepare this data set. Some of you may remember about 10 years ago when KSUS, at the time they were called, now Kentucky Stats, did some work for us looking at engineering. And what we found in that data was that Kentucky trained a lot of engineers, but in many cases they were moved to other states. And that created really an outgoing of brain power for our state. And I have some good news about this report. I mean, we are finding out that we are retaining many more engineers than we ever had before. And in fact, we're doing better than many of our sister states that we used to lose engineers to. Now, the purpose of this study is to assess how effective our institutions are in meeting the workforce demands in this engineering sector. And as some of you know, or if you've read any of our work, you know that one of the big priorities we have is to make that connection between all that we do and the ultimate workforce, and truly have that trained workforce to build our economy in Kentucky. And my argument is that higher education has to be the key to making that happen. And this study identifies some opportunities for new academic and workforce programming. And what we want to do is to make sure that we're working hand in hand with those folks that want to hire engineers. And we're also looking at, the sector jobs that are out there, the kind of wages that they may pay, and the migration trends that are happening with our engineering coming in and out of the state. Now, there's a tremendous amount of information in this study, as you can imagine, and I hope we will use this as we use many of our other data tools, as well as our data sets, as well as our analytical outputs, to really look at policy, good policy, but we're hoping also that we can have it in such a manner that you can be able to use it to inform what you're doing. So David, with that, I want to once again thank you And hopefully that there are people on this webinar, that would be able to see exactly how they can work with you and your team in creating a better process, and in our case, a better state for preparing the next level generation of engineers. Thank you, sir.
Well, thank you, Dr. Thompson. I want to just publicly say we really appreciate your support. You've been a champion of research and actionable research that we can use for policy analysis and development. And so it's a pleasure to work on your team. I'd also like to thank Ms. Lee Nimitz, who has also been a champion of our work and really figuring out ways that we can partner with folks like Emsi. So, we really are turning a corner in terms of getting our collected data and information into actionable recommendations for state leaders and campus leaders and such. So thank you very much. Heather, if you would go to the next slide. So I want to introduce our distinguished panel today. First, on the left-hand side of the screen, Ms. Suzanne Copen-Sakwa. She is an economist at Emsi. I'd like to publicly thank her as well, because she certainly has done a tremendous amount of work in terms of not only data analytics and the details of crunching a lot of these numbers and doing statistics, but also layout and writing. Mr. Darren Hensley is a professional engineer. He's also a professional land surveyor. So Mr. Hensley is going to address some of our actionable items that are practical from this report in his day-to-day work. And let me just tell you a little bit about Mr. Hensley. He is a project manager at Mason and Hanger, and he is also the president-elect of the Kentucky Society of Professional Engineers. So he has almost 20 years of experience, mostly in the area of transportation, but he's currently working on military projects, which include engineers from backgrounds with civil, electrical, communication, mechanical, plumbing, fire safety, structural, and architecture. So that wealth of experience is who we were looking for to really tell us how we can use this report in terms of the day-to-day operations. I'd like to thank Ms. Anna Brown as well and introduce her. She's an economist with Emsi as well. She serves as the Vice President of Higher Education Consulting at Emsi. She too did a tremendous amount of work, not only with the data side, but writing and layout. And she oversaw the entire project from the Emsi side. And as I said, I'm David Mahan, and my role is to lead the data and the research team at the council. Next slide, please.
All right, hi everyone. Thank you for having us here at Emsi on the call. And I'd also really like to thank David for all of your support through this project, and also for your guidance as we went in and we analyzed the data and pulled out some of the key findings. So the analysis is robust because of a lot of the support from you. So thank you very much, David. So I'm going to introduce Emsi just for those who are not aware of who we are. So we are a data analytics company based in Moscow, Idaho. And what we do is we use labor market data, software, and consulting to connect and inform people, education, and business. And as you can see in the Venn diagram on the slide, what we're really interested in is the intersection of those three sectors and how all three can be working together in leveraging data. Our data, we hold billions of data points covering around 99% of the workforce, and this includes industries, occupations, programs, and more. And we generate it from dozens of sources, including government sources, real-time job postings, and professional profiles. Our data is provided at a variety of geographic combinations, as we'll talk about a little bit later on in this webinar. And then we also are able to update it on a quarterly basis. So we have a fairly up-to-date level of granularity within our data sets. Next slide, please. So with this analysis, the question that we are really trying to get after is, where are there misalignments between the workforce demand and supply of Kentucky College and University engineering graduates? And so we looked at this in a variety of ways. And as David mentioned, it's a very large analysis, but what we're able to do is look at both the state level and down at some regional levels, the job growth projections related to engineering occupations, we look at do a supply and demand analysis of annual engineering job openings compared to the graduates coming out of Kentucky institutions. We also provide a migration analysis where we are able to identify how many Kentucky engineering alumni are staying in the state, and if they aren't, then where are they going and what occupations are they in. We look at engineering wages, again, not just at the state level, but also for surrounding states, and looking at historical wages compared to current wages. And then a program demand gap analysis where we're able to look at specific program recommendations related to engineering. And with that, David, I'll turn it back over to you for the next slide.
So our first goal, as I opened in my opening comments, was to make this an actionable report. And so I really pushed the Emsi folks and for a tremendous amount more work, but I think the end product is that much better to break out these recommendations by geographic region in Kentucky. And so what we did is we lined up the regions based on these workforce planning areas or regions, WPRs. Now, typically there would only be four. There would be Western, or West, Central, East, and South. What we did is we added Kentuckiana LWA, local workforce area, so that we could tease out Louisville versus Lexington in our two metropolitan areas. It's important to note that this information is really important for campus leaders. If we can isolate the recommendations by individual workforce area, then we can get with these local workforce boards and really talk about engineering in that area. And so you'll see, as Anna said, much granularity in the report. It's over 250 pages long, yet we did boil down an executive summary and a list of action items by region, which we think make it very usable in terms of readability. And then if you want to take that deeper dive and really look into your workforce area or your campus area, then things like the academic discipline with engineering, the degree level, the job growth projections, the median salaries, migration analysis of in-out of recruitment of engineers. So it's really a robust report. So we'd like it to be not just a report, but a tool. Next slide, please. So this is one of my favorite infographics of the report, and I think Anna and Suzanne did really a fantastic job with it. What we'd like to see is who employs Kentucky engineers. So these industries, you can look at the state level and the total there, or you can look by these workforce regions. If you look at the bottom right-hand corner, you see the state level totals. And so you see the engineering service is our biggest industry, our biggest employer, which is those engineering firms that do all the A to Z of engineering. It's also important to note that manufacturing plays a major role in the state. And so if you look at the Louisville area, there at the very top in purple, you can see the symbol for the car and the symbol for the refrigerator, showing that Ford and General Electric organizations are very in our employment of engineers. You also get a sense for the importance of the state and the federal government within Kentucky and in the employment picture. And so if you look at the western side of the state, you see that the federal government and the military play a major role in employing engineers there. And really throughout, you get a real sense of the importance of state government, which you will see on subsequent slides that our civil engineering occupation continues to grow and actually show gaps in the number of graduates versus the number of engineers needed. Next slide, please.
Hi, everyone. This is Suzanne. So if we're talking about jobs, I think this slide and the next slide are talking about jobs in Kentucky, and the next slide will talk about those engineering specific jobs. So in the figure here, we're looking at overall job growth from 2009 to current year, and then projected into the future for the state of Kentucky And that's in the darker blue line. And that's also relative to what growth looks like in the US. So you can see from 2009 to 2019, there was steady job growth in Kentucky and the US, but job growth across all jobs in Kentucky fell somewhat short compared to the US. When we take that projection to the 10-year projection, that kind of gap grows a little bit, but jobs overall in Kentucky are steadily growing. And of course, this data here was pre-COVID, so job projections now are estimates before March. And then in the next slide, we see how engineering jobs fare in Kentucky compared to engineering jobs in the US. So there's a selection of engineering jobs that we captured within the report, civil engineers, industrial engineers, as David had spoke of. And if we compare job growth from 2009 to current jobs in the state of Kentucky, that's the navy line, and look at job projections 10 years in the future, we see that job growth in Kentucky from 2009 all the way up to 2029 is expected to be around 29%. So lots of job growth within engineering occupations. And that really matches what's going on in the US. So the US overall engineering job growth between 2009 and 2029 is expected to be around 27%. So what this is showing is that if we look at all jobs in Kentucky, jobs are growing, but falling short compared to job growth in the US. But if we really hone in on those engineering occupations, what we're seeing is that Kentucky is really strong. And engineering is just a wonderful opportunity for jobs, and that translates to what's going on in higher education for programs that train and educate people for entering the engineering workforce. And then Anna will take it over for the next slide.
So kind of with this background on engineering industries and occupations at a high level, now we're just going to start tying them to academic programs across the state. So this slide here is a very high level view of where we are looking at demand. So in this case, the demand is the gray line on top, and what this represents is annual job openings for engineering jobs where people would be entering them with a bachelor's degree or above. And we compare that to supply in terms of the annual output of Kentucky engineering graduates at the bachelor's degree level and above. And that is the kind of like the dark blue line. And we look at this, historical and then also projected forward. And what we see at a very high level is that, right now there's a gap between engineering jobs, so the demand for engineering jobs, and supply of Kentucky engineering graduates. And it's a little bit hard to know exactly what the engineering completions are going to look like in the future. So we did two different views. We have one where we just did kind of a linear trend going into the future, and then another that's the dotted line of looking at if the most recent academic year of 2018-19, if the output of engineering graduates from that year were to remain constant, what would it look like? And so what we see is that no matter what, 2023 would be the year that we would see supply and demand, kind of become in equilibrium. Or if the engineering output remains constant, which may be likely because of what's been going on with the COVID crisis, that actually the current output of Kentucky engineering graduates would never quite meet the demand for engineering jobs across the state. So at a very high level, that's the first view. And then on the next slide, we go into a little bit more detail around the specific programs where we see opportunity. So in this analysis, what we did was we looked at every engineering program offered by Kentucky institutions, and we looked at them by individual program at the 6-digit level, so very, very detailed, and we looked at it by award level. And what we're showing here is kind of a high level view of some of the top programs for opportunity at the bachelor's degree and above level. And what this slide represents is a few areas where there are some gaps meaning that there is more demand than there is supply, and therefore where there is some opportunity. The top two programs are within engineering technology, and they kind of across the board, even across all the different regions, we saw that these were some of the highest demand programs. And what's really driving this is the demand for industrial engineers. We also see demand for civil engineers and computer and electrical engineers in particular too. One thing to keep in mind though is that there is overlap in academic disciplines mapping to some of these occupations. So some engineers will often have skill sets that can meet demand in multiple occupations. In other words, you might be trained as a civil engineer, but you could also be able to be employed in a related engineering job. So we saw, not shown on the slide, but within the analysis, we did find that mechanical and chemical engineers show a surplus, meaning that right now there's more output of graduates than there is demand. But these engineers may be able to find opportunities in industrial engineering jobs, for example, where we see these high gaps. And so, so it's one thing to look at a very specific granular program level, but also realizing that there is also a lot of overlap between these programs. And regardless, the manufacturing industry is remaining a very important sector for Kentucky engineering job growth in general. And on the next slide, we're able to break down a little bit more. As I mentioned, the industrial engineers are really what's driving a lot of the Kentucky engineering job growth. And this is kind of one lens into seeing why. And what we're seeing is that a lot of the industrial engineers are in kind of the older age bands of 45 to 64 years, and especially compared to many of the other engineering occupations. And so what we're seeing is that this indicates a graying out of the industrial engineering workforce, which is generating some of that increased demand across the state. We also see similar scenario for electrical and engineers, and also architectural and engineering managers. And then on the flip side, mechanical engineers are fairly split across the different age groups, which is probably also why we're not seeing as much of generally a demand, because a lot of people are already employed as a mechanical engineer. There's not as much new job growth per se within that occupation. But by looking at the different engineering occupations by these different age groups, it helps provide a little bit of a lens into some of what might be driving some of the growth or just the demand in terms of replacement jobs. And with that, I'll turn it back over to David for the next section.
Thank you, Anna. So as you noted, or you may have noted from President Thompson's initial remarks, that a study about 10 years ago from our sister agency, KY Stats, really had some alarming results that we were too many Kentucky trained engineers to out-of-state employers. And so when we approached this study, one of the first things that we talked about was whether that could be validated, that in fact it was a problem 10 years ago, and has it gotten any better? And as Dr. Thompson said, we really, excuse me, we really have good news to share here. So you can see the circled 54% of Kentucky trained engineers remain in the Kentucky workforce. And so that compares well to our national average at 43%. What we did is down the bordering state numbers as well, because we really need to benchmark with those states that would be really in a competitive situation with us. And you can see that Indiana is 38%, Illinois 45%, Missouri 52%, West Virginia 27%, and Tennessee and Ohio are right there with us with 54, 55%. So we're in a pretty competitive situation, and let me that put us in fifth amongst that group. And so we feel pretty confident that we are making great strides since 2009, considering that if you go up and down the column there in 2009, you see we were mostly fifth or sixth in position on all of those occupations. So certainly good news to report here. Next slide. So first bullet, and go ahead and click through if you would, Heather. So our first bullet is overall job growth compared engineering to the state economy as a whole. And you can see it's problematic that our projections on the job growths are less than that of national, but we are competitive in the engineering sector. Second bullet, Kentucky wages continue to increase, and therefore we're more competitive than we were 10 years ago, and therefore we're keeping 54% of our engineers, our trained engineers state. In the third bullet, you see the population growth is also problematic for us. And so we're projecting about 6% growth versus 11% nationally. Now, many of you know that we have an attainment goal. We call it 60 by 30 in the state of Kentucky, where we would strive to gain 60% of our working age Kentuckians would have a post-secondary credential of some sort by the year 2030. We are currently at 4.9%, only 1.5 percentage points below the national average. So we're tracking towards meeting this goal. However, much of our work, our progress to date is around shorter term certificates to meet immediate workforce demand. When we look at the associate degree level or higher, we are about 7 percentage points below the national average. And we have significant gaps between our white residents and our African American and Hispanic residents. So there's much to think about in terms of attainment level, and that we focus on a great that impacts our recruitment of out-of-state employers and our recruitment of out-of-state engineers, for example, to come work in the Commonwealth. And then the final bullet on this slide is around manufacturing. And as Anna pointed out, it's a growth area for years in our skilled workers, but it's a problematic area for our unskilled or less skilled workers and represents some of our highest unemployment rates given the movement towards automation. And next slide, Heather. So when we get into various gap analysis, and we look at those baccalaureate degree conferring programs that will continue to grow, we note again that manufacturing, engineering, technology, again around much of that auto trend is pushing much growth in Kentucky. And so we feel very confident that the programs will continue to recruit and graduate and put our graduates in positions of leadership and engineering work throughout the state, and that will continue to be healthy for years to come. Civil engineering continues to be an important area, as is computer engineering. And this is true in both the Kentuckiana LWA, which is the Louisville area, and the Lexington areas. So in other words, our metropolitan areas are going to continue to see much work around civil engineering and computer engineering. At KCTCS, our community and technical system, we note that the quality control technicians will continue to grow in terms of the demand over all the regions in the state. And one of the tricky parts to this recommendation, and something that we talked closely with the Emsi folks about, so many of these employees are trained on site and they do not have the credential before they apply for the positions. And so KCTCS has done a really nice job of partnering with our employers to begin to train up and skill up our residents before they would apply for these positions. Next slide, please. So this is a summative slide, and you can see it's engineering, technology, and the quality control technicians. Those folks will continue to see much demand, and there's just not enough supply. That the green on the top right is certainly very healthy, and these areas will continue to thrive. But it's important what Anna noted earlier for our the two quadrants in the bottom, that many of our skilled engineers have these malleable skills that will in fact meet the needs in other disciplines. So your path of chemical engineering that we knew in the past towards employment, or mechanical engineering, it may look a little different, but areas like industrial engineering and all the manufacturing related areas will continue to push opportunities for our engineers in many disciplines. And so we think we're still very, very healthy in terms of the meeting the demand, and just noting that there are many growth opportunities. Next slide, please. So I'm going to turn this back over to our panel, and also to open it up for the audience to ask questions. We have a couple I'd like to ask Mr. Hensley from the beginning, and then I will kick off our bigger discussion. So Darren, the report shows a comprehensive look at engineers, but of course this is all pre-COVID-19. What do you anticipate as job opportunities, and maybe new job opportunities, as we reopen the Kentucky economy?
Thank you, David, and thank you for having me join you today. I think as far as new opportunities go, we may see a growth in HVAC, mechanical engineering, as far as air purification and air circulation as a result of COVID-19. As far as standard engineering practices, I think it will stay fairly consistent with what we've been seeing. There will be growth, but it won't be a spike or anything like that, other than just a few areas where we could improve functions as a result of the virus. You know, everybody's working from home. There may be areas to improve internet, Wi-Fi connections, and things of that nature for electrical engineers. But in general, it should be pretty stable.
Yeah. Throughout your career, you have worked with engineers from so many different backgrounds. What do you think the biggest surprise as you look through the report? What would be your initial reaction in terms of things that you didn't expect in the report that are conclusions for the sector analysis of engineering in Kentucky?
Well, I think it helped connect a few dots and open my eyes, if you will, about the way that this research was conducted. We've had open job openings for 6 or 8 months for various mechanical, electrical, civil roles, and it's almost impossible to find someone with about 10 years of experience. And in reviewing the report, that makes sense, because 10 years ago they mostly went out of state when they got out of school, and that really opened my eyes and connected some dots.
Do you agree with the report that things are better over the last years in terms of in your recruiting efforts? Are you seeing improvements? And I guess that varies a little bit by discipline.
Yes, I do agree with it. It primarily does relate to the growth in salaries, as pointed out in the report. We're able to do a better job of retaining. The universities are doing a good job of improving throughout the years as well, to help retain in state with partnerships for internships and such. Yeah,
thank you. Well, I'd like to open it up to the audience. Heather, do we have any questions in the chat room from the audience?
Not currently, but if anyone would like to present some questions, just type it in the chat there.
Okay, and I'll take this opportunity to get Suzanne and Anna with some questions from the Emsi side. So with this really comprehensive wealth of information that we've applied to the very specific geographic regions in Kentucky, what do you see as the future with these types of reports in terms of data that we don't currently have, but we'd like to continue to look at. And I should note for the audience that we do have a partnership. Emsi has a partnership with the Strata folks and the Consumer Insights, which used to be Gallup. And so we even have survey data in this report, and it is graduates in the STEM area at the baccalaureate level, not specific to just engineers, but all STEM areas. And so we can sense how happy they were with their engineering experience and how happy they were with their overall campus level experience. But what would you say are areas that you guys are exploring in terms of data needs that we'll be able to add to this type of report in the future?
So I think one thing, and Suzanne, I'll guess I'll go first, and I'll let Suzanne go second. But with these types of reports, so I think one thing would be adding in a little bit more around COVID now that we know a little bit more of what's going on. So this report is, as we've mentioned several times before, was pre-COVID, and now that we're starting to see some of the states opening up, we're able to pull in some more of those different insights. I think another thing that would be an interesting lens to look at this through would be a little bit more at the skill level too, just to be able to match what types of skills are coming out, are Kentucky engineering graduates coming out with from the curriculum from the institutions, and then matching that with the types of skills that are in demand. So it's taking it a level deeper than what we looked at here in terms of looking at program to occupation and going down to the skill level and really being able to match that. So those are a couple of the initial ideas that would be interesting to further explore within these types of reports. And Suzanne, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, I think for a field like engineering, what I see as really valuable is that you can have a high school diploma and with a little bit of post-secondary education training with a certificate or even some non-credit programs. Credit programs weren't put into this study. Find a good career with wages that are good for the state, for the Commonwealth. But also for those people who are staying in school for a graduate degree and PhDs in engineering related occupations, there's opportunity in Kentucky. So I think overall, whether you're looking to join one of the community colleges in Kentucky or pursuing a PhD within the field, there's opportunity in the state. And I think the wage data I see is really important. David, that insight that you mentioned, the survey data related to how people feel about their undergraduate experience, that also was pretty interesting, and to see that a lot of students were very happy with their education in the state, so that's good. But overall, I think this report was really great because for people who are looking to spend a couple of months in college, a part of a community college, there's lots of opportunity, and even for those who are pursuing more degrees.
And I, back to the quality question, I think it's really interesting to get feedback from the graduates in a systematic way. This may be one of the first times that we've been able to do graduate outcomes via survey in a way other than, campuses trying to track down their individual, student graduates. And it's just, they don't have the bandwidth and the do it. And so, to partner with, the Strata folks to really begin to look at, not only, how their experience, but how do they feel about their preparation in terms of what the workforce really demanded of them in terms of their skill set. And then to overlay that with the same question with the employers that hired them. And so I think there's great potential to look at this even more deeply, because we're getting a lot of pressure to not only understand the volume, which that's the primary focus of the report, and understand meeting workforce demands and wages and such, but also, where are these graduates in terms of how well they think they were prepared versus how well the employers feel like they should be prepared.
Yeah, I would argue that that relationship between industry and businesses and higher education is that much more important right now. It's really important that the programs, whether they're certificate level programs or graduate degree level programs, that those programs really provide value to their students. And that can only happen with that feedback loop from companies and businesses within your county or within your region.
Yeah. And I think it is going on within those regions and within, more local workforce things, because, all of our engineering schools have boards that give them feedback. But can we do it in a systematic way so that we can, at the state level, begin to make recommendations and better understand the bigger picture? And so I really like what you're saying, and I think we're certainly going in the right direction.
David, we've got several questions coming in. Would you like me to read these to you?
Please.
Okay. This one was actually submitted prior to the webinar, and he's typed it in here again. I believe that he works with K-12, and so they're wanting to know, how can they prepare these students to help meet this gap that might be coming in the future and get them the kids in the pipeline. I personally have an 18-year-old that's getting ready to go to college, and when I said the word engineer to him, it's very intimidating. And so I think this is probably a good talk. How do you manage that?
Yeah, no, thank you for that, Heather. Darren, would you be willing to take a first stab at answering?
Absolutely. I'm involved in several aspects of trying to get engineering out into younger education. The Math Counts program is a middle school program for 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. It's a math competition, and both University of Kentucky and University of Louisville provide full scholarships to the top finishers, and then Western Kentucky University provides partial scholarships. And that's working directly with the engineering schools in the state to the middle school level to help gather interest in those who are good at math. And other programs that exist, a Future Cities program, where you take recycling trash essentially and build a city out of it, is another way. The Project Lead the Way program, it goes up and down in Kentucky, but it is a high school level program that is very good as well as far as getting interest in engineering.
Yeah, those are fantastic examples. And, makes me, to your point, Heather, that I think, confidence is a big piece of this, because it does sound so daunting. And it, some of these pathways that are starting, on the technical, get folks to start using their hands and think about problem solving and critical thinking, begin to build the interest and maybe even the confidence that one can become an engineer, even though the rigors are well known throughout the community.
Okay, another one that's come in, I'm just going to read this. It says, how does the supply demand gap vary across the regions? This person is from southeastern Kentucky, and they are struggling to hire engineers because the graduates prefer to stay in the more urban regions where they were educated. So, I guess the question is, how do they help with that?
Yeah, and can I have Suzanne and Anna take a first pass at that question?
Yes, and that's actually an interesting question too, especially with looking at the East, because what we saw in the eastern part of the state is we didn't see quite as many areas of opportunity, but I think that has to do with, as the person who submitted the question said, is that a lot of people are probably wanting to move out of the more rural areas and into the urban areas. But I'm going to actually pull up what we saw for at least the eastern part of the state. Overall, we did see a lot of the same findings by region of looking at where the engineering technology was some of the highest levels of opportunity by each of the different regions. But then for example, in the East and the South, we saw that so in the South, for example, we have a lot of electrical and electronic engineering technologies going on in terms of completions within there. That's kind of a little bit more than what is demanded. And then the East, we actually see that the aerospace, aeronautical, and engineering program, that's a niche. although we're not sure if people are actually finding employment necessarily in that region, or if it's more being trained in that region, and then the graduates are likely going elsewhere. So within some of the more rural areas, we did see a little bit of a lower demand. And some of our analysis may not be fully capturing the fact that students may be being trained in those regions and then going elsewhere. So I do kind of identify with what the person who asked the question is facing. Suzanne, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think the other thing to consider, Anna and I both live and work in a very rural part of the country. I'm like an hour and a half from a Target. One thing that's important for our family is quality of life. And I think that's what kind of goes beyond this report, but we do have data on cost of living index and such. So when we talk about wages, and if wages are important, those wages relative to an urban area or suburban area or rural area, that really changes things. And so I think if you are an employer in a rural area and you're trying to bring more people to your area, obviously the job is going to be very similar to the job that you're performing if you were in Lexington. But when you go home, things are going to look very different if you're in an urban area than if you're working in the east. So I think for employers that are trying to capture those, there's things that go beyond just your simple employment. Quality of life and cost of living is something that's beyond the scope of this report, but are really valued by people who, when you enter or start working for a company or a firm.
We've got another one here. It's kind of going back to the high school pipeline. This person is asking about the supply. How does the supply of adequately educated Kentucky high school graduates for engineering studies look? So how many kids are prepared to go to college and ready to join, engineering studies? And if a significant proportion of our successful graduates are from out of state or out of country. So I guess that might be two separate questions, but.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a really good question, and not one that we looked at closely within the report, but I think we can talk a little bit about it. It's fair to say that the demographics in Kentucky for high school graduates is certainly flattening, and we're looking at about a 7% decline by 2029. On top of that, our in-state college going rate has gone from about 55% to about 51%. So the short answer is it's problematic, and we need to continue to address it. Many of our campuses are addressing this with better and stronger recruitment of out-of-state students, but post COVID-19, that remains certainly in question. And so I think you're asking the right questions, and I'd like to get Darren's thoughts too in terms of the high school level students and their level of interest, and if they're staying in the state and thinking about STEM fields.
I think we're seeing more and more of the top students going to college out of the state. And that does tend to lead to them not coming back home after they graduate college. I'm not sure how we turn that around. I know UK has made strides just from my conversations directly with them. I haven't talked to any of the other universities, but I do think that we're on an upward trend on improving the students leaving the state. And I think they're there. I just think that we're not keeping them. And then I want to jump back to the previous question about the southeast part of the state, if I can, real quick. I'm from the southeast part of the state, and I moved to the central part for college, and that's where I work at now. And sort of tying back into as a result of COVID-19, it could very well become that you could live in a rural part of the state and work remote moving forward. And that's something that I think anybody can consider moving forward as you're doing a job interview. There's more and more flexibility every year in your work schedule, and this is just going to continue to trend, and that could assist in helping people who want to stay in a rural area get to stay there and still get the job they want.
Yeah. And well said.
I've got one more question on here, and it looks like we have about 3 minutes left. So unless you have another question, David, do you want me to go ahead with this one?
Yes.
This person's kind of following up on the previous question and asking if what your thoughts are on how attractive Kentucky is to getting successful engineer graduates as opposed to other states.
Darren, would you like to take that one as well?
Yeah, I can at least start off with it. I think that we have some attractive features. It's hard to compete with Google. A lot of electrical and computer engineers obviously are drawn to the big companies like that don't really have a presence in Kentucky. But we have a lot of exciting things in Kentucky. The auto manufacturing, we have several different branches of that with different companies. We have military involvement with the different forts and bases, and as well as our company. And then there's quite a bit of transportation available in Kentucky as well. Kentucky has a lot of road miles, and a lot of them are curvy and need to be made safer.
Yeah, that's a fair statement. And listed in the report, we do have our top employers, both in state, and our top employers out of state. And so that might be something that, you know, is a bit of a teaser for the audience to go in and check that out, because that was really helpful to me to understand, you know, not only, you know, the industries that we covered in this PowerPoint, but also, you know, very specifically, you know, the General Electrics, the BAE Systems, the Lockheed Martins, you know, who's employing our Kentucky engineers, both in state and out of state. And so I suggest that you take a look at that and really at least read the executive summary and some of the action items for all of our audience, because we feel like there's a lot of really good takeaways that we can continue to build on.
Before we go, I just want to let everyone know I've had several people ask me for the slide deck. And so my plan is to get that uploaded on our website, and I will place a link of that into the description of this webinar for anybody who wants to come back and take a look at it later.
Yeah, and I'd like to thank Heather Feasy for the audience and for our panelists. She's a star, and she did great production with this webinar, and I thank you for all the work that's put in. Take care, everyone.